Okay. Yeah. So on the platform, of course, you have to log in as an end user, and yeah, then you will enter the panel where everything starts. So it's the allows your workspace panel. From here, essentially, you can create an entirely new workspace from scratch to yeah, in which you can synthesize, yeah, connect to your data and then synthesize that data. You can do that by connecting to a database from scratch, or you can open an existing workspace that you have already created before. So I'm not sure if you are actually, everyone is making their own workspaces. Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so we created for them, and we also connect the database for them. So
yeah. All right. Then actually, I will go directly to into the workspaces. So once you've created it, that's actually where I went to. I went to open an existing workspace, so which is already created for you in this case, and then you can actually go into that workspace. So we have a couple of workspaces for well, demonstrations. Here, for instance, I have a workspace with patients, well, fake patients information. We use sometimes for demonstrations. And essentially, you can just open it, and then you can, well, configure everything around synthesizing the data that's in there. Yeah, so in this particular case, we have actually a database with multiple tables. I think for yeah, maintaining the highest level of data utility, for instance, if you want to use the synthetic data for research purposes or for data analytics, you often want to put the data into a single feature table. Yeah, that's the more common way to start with if you want to do some kind of analytics or train some AI models. But yeah, so essentially you get to this job configuration panel, and here's where everything starts before you finally press generate and synthesize your data. So what can you do? We typically divide the configurations you can do up in like table level configurations and column level configurations. So in terms of table level configurations, you can see already here on the left. Apparently, we have all these tables in this database, which are now all listed under synthesize. And yeah, so that essentially means they will all be synthesized. So they will go through our generative AI models and will be synthesized as such. It can, however, be that you have particular tables that do not contain privacy sensitive information at all, which you still want to include in the output generated database. So what you can do for those particular tables, for instance, here I selected the payers table, contains some information about well, organizations. So you could say potentially public information, and so you could drag it to duplicate. Also, this table contains only 10 records, so that would already be too little to synthesize because there's no really statistical patterns in there to be learned. Yeah, so what you can do, you can duplicate this table, or you can potentially exclude it if you don't think this is an interesting one at all. Then it will just be excluded from the data generation job entirely. So those are some of the table level configurations you can apply. I think another potentially interesting one is on the table level is that you can set how many records that you want to generate. So for instance, now I've selected this patients table here with we are seeing the real data in the middle of the of this patient table. And what we can say, what we can do, we can well, we can synthesize this table, but also after synthesizing, we can decide how many records we actually want to generate as output. So although we have only 12K records as input, we can say, oh, we want yeah, maybe 1 million as output. So that's something you can configure as an end user yourself. Yeah, typically we see this actually more interesting in kinds of use cases such as software testing and development, where you may want to do some stress tests with more data and see if the kind of products you're developing still work well. But yeah, I wanted to note this is also an option that you can do.
Marijn, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
So whenever you generate data that you didn't have, is there a way to know, like is there a report that says number of data inputs 1,000, outputs 100,000?
Not a report. Yeah. So so in the Syntho QA report, we do provide that number, but the Syntho QA report runs outside of the platform, as we discussed earlier. So it's not integrated into the GUI. Of course, you can see it in your database. So if you look in the database, you can do like a count all query. If you have it in a SQL database, do a select count all query, and then you can see, okay, how many records do I have in my output database, and you can compare that with the input database. So that's, in that sense, you can check it, of course, yourself.
I'm talking about like if I'm downloading someone else's synthetic data that I know that half of it was generated and half of it is real data, for example. Is there a way for me to, like, I will only find out in a report, right?
Yeah, but then just trying to understand your question. So you mean like half was generated and half was real? So what do you mean, like with for like? So
well,
you mean in terms of this example?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, maybe that's good to clarify. So when I generate 1 million records here, it does not mean I generate like also real records. It's still all synthetic records. But the idea is essentially, so I can reset it by just removing these. Let's see if it actually triggers. I don't know why now currently. All right, but at least, and so essentially we train on this particular table, so the original input records. And we can then get a trained model, right? So a generative model which we can use to generate completely new synthetic records. That's the basic idea of the platform. But we can do that generative model. We can say, oh, you can generate as many records as we had input, but you can also say generate 100,000 records or 1 million records. So still all of those records will be completely synthetic, new. So you in both cases, even if you generate as many records as you had input or you generate many more, they will all still be synthetic records. So there won't be real records in there as long as that we have the table listed under synthesize. I think that's well, at least good to be clear on. If only like really duplicate records will only occur when you drag, for instance, this table under duplicate, and then actually all these records will be copied over to the output database. And in this particular case, when I say I want to generate more records, then it will actually oversample from the original records.
Yeah.
So yeah. So, but as long as I have it under synthesize, we won't generate original records. It will still be. It will. Yeah. You can generate as many as you want.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm glad you corrected, like as I explained a little bit more. But I'm talking about like the implications of like in research, it's important that you at some point said, okay, this research was done with 1,000 participants, or the synthetic data has then 5,000 points, right? So this is my only, that it should be clear somewhere that you're having more points, because and that's very fair. Like all of the data will be synthetic regardless, but the original or like the real data, let's say, is based on a specific number of points that you collected, right? So, but it's just, I just wanted to know if we could, like, if you are using, you publish your data, you publish your synthetic data set, and then if someone else is using it, how that other person knows that this has more data points that were generated synthetically, and the original data has 1,000 instead of 100,000, for example. if there was a
Right.
quick way of finding out, but I guess that only comes in a report, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's mainly it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
Thank
a good
you.
one. Yeah, probably you want to document that somewhere, like not that that you say like, oh, we have 100 million records, so people think, oh, well, that's a great data set, but it's actually
Exactly.
based on only 5,000 records or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So that's a good one. Yeah. All right. So I think another. Oh, go ahead.
Not just following up on this. So do I understand correctly?
Yes.
So typically we create more observations in the synthetic data than were in the original data set. Is that correct?
Correct. So in this case, so that's an option. By default, it will generate as many records as output as there were input records. But you can, as I just illustrated here, you can set this number to any number you want, essentially. Because we have a trained generative model, and the trained generative model, we can just say, okay, generate as many records as I ask you to generate. Yeah.
And the best practice kind of, or like, I mean, also you increase the statistical power when you have much more observations.
Yeah. So indeed, the default is just generating as much records that you have as input. And for some use cases, you may want to generate more, but there won't be more information in the data in that sense. If you generate more data, the statistical patterns will be the same. So you won't get new or additional insights by generating more data, for example. So the default is just the default setting in the platform is just generating as much output as you had as input, which is generally fine, I would say. Yeah, only maybe for testing and development use cases, you may sometimes mentioned before, stress testing or these kind of things, you may want to have more records. But if it's for analytics purposes, I would say there's not a real need to oversample.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.